Hi there, I thought I'd do a video about this game, Here Come the Rebels, which I have been playing. It's going to be kind of my musings on the game. I'll probably call it a review because people tend to like that word because it suggests something kind of quite concise and decisive about it. But it's really going to be more about my musings on the game, especially in relation to the game Lee versus Grant, which I've played a fair bit fairly recently and really enjoyed. So I'll give a quick sort of overview of the game just for those who don't know much about it, compare it a little bit with Lee versus Grant, and then speak about my sort of thoughts about this particular game, its success and or failure in what I think it's trying to do. As you can see, the game has a kind of a bit of a dog's leg of a map. These displays are separate from the map, and this portion of the map provides charts and tables. There's a county display here so that the map's divided in counties, and there's some charts and tables provided for the players, which I have above there. You have Washington here in the District of Columbia and these forts around it. Then you have the Potomac running along here, the Shenandoah here, and so these are the Blue Ridge Mountains, South Mountain up there, Catoctin Mountain there, and here is Harper's Ferry. Over here going through into Virginia, so this is Virginia, Maryland over here, and this part is also still Virginia. They're divided into various counties, so you have Montgomery, Prince George, Jane Arundel, you have Baltimore there, Baltimore County, Carroll, Frederick East, etc., Frederick West, Washington County there, and then Berkeley, Jefferson, Frederick here, and this is North Mountain here, and down here is Winchester. Up here is the Antietam Creek, and there is the town of Sharpsburg. So historically in this campaign that this game depicts, it ended in the Battle of Antietam, September 1862. I had to check. I'm not a history buff, but I am a game lover, and I do love the American Civil War games. That's kind of the scope of the map. Then what we have is every county has a depot. Most of them are Union, and there's two depots, Confederate depots here. The Confederates come on, they start at Leesburg, and they have one division starts at Leesburg, and the rest come on at Leesburg. And so the Confederates have there's Lee with the Army of Northern Virginia, and then you have Longstreet's divisions, so that's his corps, Jackson's divisions in his corps, Stuart's divisions, it's sort of termed a corps. Were they strictly divisions of brigades, weren't they? Cavalry brigades. That's the extent of the Confederate forces. The Union have a lot more forces. There's these holding boxes which depict things like the 9th Corps, the 11th Corps, the 12th Corps, etc., and then lots more units dotted around. So they have, I think of a 10th, 7th and 8th Corps don't exist in the Union forces here. You can still use those holding boxes for other units. So obviously the Union has a lot more units, but there's, as you can see, many of them are turned sideways, which means they're unactivated and they have to get committed. So the Union commitment track starts here, and then every turn you roll for. I'm talking about the campaign game. So there's some scenarios, some basic scenarios, an advanced scenario, and then there's the main campaign game. That's what I'm talking about here. Then you have a random events table. At the beginning of every turn, it could either be rain. Rain really slows down movement. The Confederates, I think, don't really want it because the Union are a bit slower anyway. The Confederates need movement to get to places and perform the activities which they want to. Then Union commitment, which will move that box counter here, and that will release some units from commitment. So some corps gradually their units get all released. And then also all Union command paralysis. So up to a certain point, that means that the Union units, any unit this side of the Potomac will not operate. And the ones that have already set up essentially around Harper's Ferry and Martinsburg up there will move more slowly. At a certain point about, I think, I can't remember exactly, but the game's, each turn's a day, running from September 4th to the 27th, so what's that, 17 days. Roughly about halfway, that command paralysis goes, and any command paralysis roll becomes Union commitment. So you can see that the Union uncommitted divisions and brigades, and even in cavalry regiments, because the cavalry Union side come as regiments, they will gradually become more uncommitted. Now you can see the situation you have here is I've just sort of called the game at the September the 14th turn, and these are all still uncommitted. Many of these are uncommitted. Now if even though units may not be committed because of the track, if a Confederate unit moves within 8 hexes of them, they are automatically committed. So because Stuart had rampaged up here, he was burning railway stations for destroying railway stations, tearing up the tracks, burning down the stations for victory points. Some of these were committed due to that. There's a railway line, main railway line, which runs up here, goes along here, and then it goes down and reaches Harper's Ferry and then goes further that way. Now the Union can move units by rail along that line, but only up to this point. The two maps actually join here, they overlap slightly, and the Union can only rail move in the west map. If Stuart burns a railway station, obviously they can only get as far as that. The railway line effectively stops there. That can also affect supplies. So the Union essentially, most of the heavy units start here. Most of the corps, in fact all of the corps are here. They essentially moved up here. Some made a dash through here to try and threaten the Confederate supply bases, and ended up turning back. McClellan and the First Corps ended up here. So this is Union force, and this is so McClellan's essentially here. Actually, McClellan moved out to try and help capture a Confederate division over here, but he's since moved back. And on the other side we have Lee. They've taken Harper's Ferry. They're feeding off the supplies the Union left on surrendering that. And yeah, so the Confederates essentially, Stuart moved up here, did some cavalry raiding. Division moved up here, took Frederick, which and that is the seat of county control, was in enough strength in that county to start gaining 3 victory points every turn that they held that point. And eventually the Union railed up, basically Hooker's First Corps, up here in stages, and some came steaming up along the pike here and threw that division out. They ran around trying to capture the division. In the meantime, Jackson had managed to come this side of Harper's Ferry, surrounded it. Lee was this side, had taken the heights, had batteries threatening it. They surrendered. Jackson was able to come out, and he's gone on to Winchester, did some burning, destroyed some stuff there as well, gaining more victory points. And the Confederate force actually managed to slip away. It was being surrounded. Hooker had a chance. He had it surrounded. He failed in his chance to take it in battle, and it managed to slip away. So the game has actually stood at this point whereby the Confederates have gained 70 victory points, essentially through destroying things, through capturing Harper's Ferry. I counted the 10 points they will get in a minute just for destroying the depot there, because they're going to and having a seat in Maryland for about let me see, 6 or 7 turns, gaining them about 20, 21 victory points. That gave them enough victory points such that this is actually Stuart's cavalry, which after raiding around here and being sort of chased backwards, ran up here, and were being chased up here and in danger of being surrounded. Even if Stuart's cavalry are destroyed, that's 5 strength points there. What's that, 500, 1,000 cavalry? I forget how it is in this game. Even if the Confederates succeed in eliminating that, they will only gain 10 victory points for that. It's still enough for a Confederate minor victory. So the Confederates are satisfied just to withdraw. Hopefully Stuart escapes as well. They've taken enough that they will just withdraw and be satisfied with the Confederate minor victory. Now, the only chance the Union would have to reverse that is to engage a significant Confederate force in battle and defeat more. So you gain 2 victory points for every strength point the opponent loses. So they would want to, inflict something like 20 strength point losses without taking. Maybe they could say take 10. So gain 10 difference, 20 victory points difference over the Confederates. So the Union are seeking for decisive battle. So they're perched here, here, and here, and but their disadvantage is such is that the Union infantry units, every time they're activated, they have 1 die of movement points. Confederate have 1 die plus 1. If you have a leader, the Union get 1 die plus 1. The Confederate, essentially Jackson and Longstreet are their 2 infantry leaders, 1 die plus 2. And so the Confederates are moving faster, and the cavalry is even more difference. Union cavalry 2 dice, 2 plus 1 normally. Stuart will add 3. The Confederate cavalry units don't have any cavalry leaders, so you can see the Confederates move faster, and on the whole, so as a Union you have to maneuver. You're maneuvering slowly. You have to sort of surround from a distance, gradually creep in, and hopefully maybe get some lucky rolls or unlucky rolls for the Confederates before you can kind of seal the net and capture an enemy unit. Which brings me really to the point, sort of the main point I want to raise about the difference between this and the Lee versus Grant system. Now, this is the second game of the great battles of the American Civil War system, which grew out of Lee versus Grant. And Lee versus Grant, essentially its map area was a third of the space of this map area. It's like about this big. Now, I don't know if the scales, and it depicts a wilderness campaign of 64. I don't know if the scale is exactly the same, but the hexagonons are the same size, so your decision space is a third of the size. You could depict the same space instead of like 30 by or 40 by 80 hexagonals, you could depict the same geographical space in 4 by 8 hexagons, in which case your decision space is vastly reduced. So it's the decision space I'm talking about, the hexagons, rather than the physical in reality coverage, where the difference is. So in that, because you have this movement and combat is affected through activation throat, so every turn, apart from sort of various administrative things, the main part of each turn is the action cycle. The person with the initiative rolls, and so well, you both roll at the beginning of the action cycle. The Confederates have initiative. In this case, 6, Confederate Red versus Union 1. So then they'll say, okay, I'm going to activate whichever unit, and they roll the die, find the movement, and they perform the movement. If you want to attack, you attack during movement. So you say, okay, I get 6 movement points. I use 3 of those for movement and 2 for a prepared attack. Or I might do a hasty attack, only expending 1, or I might attack column of route. So expend no movement points for my attack. It's essentially, kind of a probing scouting attack with a -3 to your die roll. The die roll is a d6 in combat, and it's adjusted by not very much. So for example, the defender can get from +2 for defending across a bridge or a ford or a mountain hex, +1 on a creek. Then there's a ratio modifier, and so if the attacker's at 2 to 1, he gets +1. The defender's advantage it, so attacking at 1 to 2, it's -1. So you have that, and then you have crucial modifiers from the leaders. So the Confederate leaders have better tactical modifiers. So the Confederate leaders are generally getting the better modifiers in attack as well. But anyway, all that to say that so once that activation is finished, then you roll for initiative again, and units become fatigued the more activations they take and don't recover so quickly. But you can do extended marches, things which probably I should have made the Union do if they had wanted to engage the Confederates better. But the point is that with that, say you have 6 movement points and you're expending 1 movement point on a track each time you move. Within a decision space this big, there's all the units are a lot closer, and so in that one essentially you have the Union sort of the Confederates in Lee versus Grant, the Confederates at the top, their objectives down the bottom, and the Union are kind of in between. The Confederates trying to go past them, the Union trying to stop them, and with the same difficulties, being a bit slower and more ponderous, but with greater strength. But you can see all the action happens quite intensely and quickly in that small decision space. In this situation, now I don't know what the first game in this series, Stonewall Jackson's Way, I think it was, has. I don't know if it has 2 maps or a single map or whatever. But in any case, and it's possible to join that to this game to have a great big campaign. But in any case, in this game, the decision space is so big. The units are so far apart. So the Unions start down here. The Confederates start here, and they're sort of moving up here, trying to attempt their objectives quickly and then get out. So they want to. The Confederates essentially they want to go here, and then Harper's Ferry, and then take some success over here, and then retreat off the map there without getting destroyed. The Union are trying to get to them, and so the situation is a very different one from Lee versus Grant. The game system is very similar. I'll speak about the main difference in a minute, but the situation is very different. And the first time I played this game, I was a little bit disappointed because I felt the system's solid, and the change I think was probably major changes is very interesting, but I felt that the situation did not kind of let the system shine because well, I played the game again. This is the result of my second game, and I corrected some mistakes which I'd made, some assumptions which wouldn't really have changed the way the game played out, but now I've played it with the rules all correctly. But essentially, you can argue that historically this is very accurate. Essentially what's happening is the Confederates are running around causing all their trouble, and the Union are trying to bring them to decisive battle. The Confederates may at certain points want to create decisive battle, but their decisive battle is going to be far superior force picking off isolated Union division or corps at the most, because the Confederates cannot afford losses and sort of be and the risk of battle, because the battles are risky, unless you've got a large amount of modifiers in your favour. So essentially that means much better leader and a much greater tactical modifier. So example, at 7-1 odds you get +6 on your die roll modifier, which essentially means you're going to get a good result as the attacker. You might take a little bit of loss. The bigger you are, the more loss you're going to take anyway. But you can sort of say, I can... Not that you necessarily know your ratio beforehand, but you would want to ensure that you have some idea of that, so that you are going to ensure a very good success. The Union, on the other hand, they've got such a vast army, they're trying to collect it all to one point that they can pin down the Confederates and cause a decisive defeat against them. And they could even, I think, pit their whole army against the whole Confederate army and not worry about taking too many losses, and then sort of try again the next day and so forth like that. So what that means is that essentially most of the action, the Confederates are mostly involved around here, Stuart's probably running around somewhere around here, and then the Union are just ponderously chugging, trying to get a point to the point about here, which is 2/3 of the way through the game, where they can say, right, we're more or less consolidated, now we're going to move on the Confederates. And hopefully they're at the point where the Confederates can't just slip away with a victory, be it just maybe a minor victory. And so it creates a very different tempo of game. Lee versus Grant was a really tight game of manoeuvre and action every turn. Here it's just a sort of slow chug-a-lug of impending doom and escaping from the clutches of that. So that's a sort of one main point to for me of my highlight about this game. And I much more enjoyed the game the second time than the first, because I had realised that the sort of the main... I'm not going to talk about all the ins and outs of the game, about how supply works and this differently and so forth. But the main differences I feel in the system is in the combat, because in Lee versus Grant, essentially each unit, so that was a division or maybe a cavalry regiment or brigade, activated separately and fought separately. You might have gained, if you fought and you had some of your units adjacent, you would gain a modifier for other units being adjacent. But essentially each unit, division is in the main, attacked separately. In this, you now have two extra things. One is corps as core activation and core assault, and then stemming from core assault, you also have the chance of I forget what they call it, but essentially army, a grand assault they call it, which is a whole army. So with core activation, what it means is essentially instead of moving one unit at a time, you can move all the units of a corps in the same activation. So if you gain initiative, you're not just moving one unit and then maybe from one division from a corps, maybe losing the initiative in the next activation and your opponent going, and then you win initiative in the third succeeding go and move another division from your corps. With the core activation, if you have a corps leader and there's units within 3 hexes of, he can activate all those divisions in the same activation. What that then means is, so yes, you could maneuver to surround, look for flanking attack and pinning a unit ready for, then taking a corps assault. Now that's a different activation. So a corps assault is it's not just activating all your divisions in range for movement. It has no movement involved in it, but it enables you to engage all those divisions in the attack, so you can bring all their strength to bear. So, for example, instead of, say, having a division of 10 strength against another division of 10 strength with some plus bonuses for having other adjacent divisions in your corps, as you would have in Lee versus Grant. Here, although you have to have moved into position in the activation before, or an activation prior, you then will have the opportunity to say you've got 3 divisions of 10 strength, so now you've got 30 strength against 10. And because combat is not mandatory against adjacents, you can choose with that. So if there's like 3 divisions in the hex you're attacking, their strength is combined. But if there's 1 division there, 1 there, and 1 there, they're in adjacent hexes, you can attack just one of them. And then likewise, the Grand Assault is whereby you can have units from different corps all attacking together. Now, so that's essentially that's the biggest change, because as I see it, because whereas Lee versus Grant was really about the manoeuvre, and combat was really a function of manoeuvre, in that you might push the opponent out of the way, cause some strength losses, but you weren't really manoeuvring to look for a major set-piece battle. And that, I guess, was appropriate for the Wilderness campaign, because that wasn't really possible in the confusion and the tangle of the Wilderness terrain. But here, because we're looking at a campaign that culminated in Antietam, that is a major factor in what one is aiming for, especially as a Union, perhaps as a Confederate in certain situations. And so the rules enable you to perform that, either corps assault or a whole army assaulting, bringing, you say, a whole army to bear on one hex of defenders. So that's very interesting, because it has a completely different complexion to the game, because whereas in Lee versus Grant, the Unions were, because the Confederates are quite slippery, they were looking more to sort of block and wear down the Confederates through attrition. Whereas here, so it was more about manoeuvre, whereas here it's about manoeuvre and aiming towards a decisive set-piece battle. And I think that is a very exciting proposition. Unfortunately, I haven't managed to get to it in my 2 playings of the game, because as I just mentioned, the Confederates are happy where they are at the moment, to slip away with a minor victory. So they could have, either side could gain a minor, substantial, or decisive victory. They're happy just to have enough of a victory, even if it's not a substantial one. Because for them to gain a substantial victory, they're really going to have to defeat a decisive amount of Union forces, and likewise the Union have to do that. The Confederates can gain victory points these other ways, from their burnings and their taking controls of counties for numbers of times. That the Union can't do that. They can only gain their victory points. Well, they can gain victory points for occupying Winchester. They can get 8 victory points for that, but otherwise they need to defeat the Confederate army. That is and stop the Confederate from gaining victory points. So that is their goal. So they're trying to stop that burning and rapine and so forth. And the Confederates sitting in force in the county and inciting, stirring up opposition. What I'm going to do now is, although I called the game, what I'm going to do is continue playing it and to try and to have them. As a Confederate player, I would not put this at this point to try and engage the Union in decisive battle, because they've got enough force up here that it's going to be unlikely that I will be able to move in on a single force, defeat it in battle, and move out quickly enough before a nasty Union number of elements corner me and force me into a decisive battle at odds against my liking. So the Confederates would slip away. The Union hasn't managed to obtain that which they needed. And they've taken some lessons from that and how they would play the game next. But I'm going to continue the game and look for that decisive battle. I think what I'll do is record a short video afterwards to describe my impressions of how that combat system works, that manoeuvre and combat system works, and because I wasn't able to meet it in time for this review. But I wanted to get this out because I'm going to have to move some things around. I don't know what else to say. Sorry, it's been a bit static. You can see here Confederates have been blocking the Union. Yeah, it's without sort of showing you what was going on, it's a bit difficult to speak about what has happened. So the Union were blocking here because the Confederates could have gone across there. So I think, yes, the last thing I want to talk about is, so what are the Confederate options? Because you can get if you gain Washington, entry to Washington, essentially you win the game. You can get a heck of a lot of victory points up in Baltimore, but as doing that, you're activating units that might otherwise, as in this game, unactivated. These would all activate, and so it's not likely that that's going to be successful. So the obvious thing for the Confederates to do is what they did, is to gain a county seat here, maybe moving up there and sacrificing a division, because it's more easily cornered by the Union and probably captured and destroyed the higher up it is. So gaining a county seat there for as long as possible, then withdrawing, taking Harper's Ferry, and then mopping up the Union units there, and Martinsburg, taking the depot there, gaining the victory points that way, and then have Stuart just burning as much as he can before the Union get enough force up for him to, forcing him to skedaddle to gain those extra victory points, and then slip away before the Union can bring their force down to bear, unless the Confederates see like a Union division in a precarious position and they think they can swoop on it and destroy it without danger of being cornered by the Union. So most of the action's happening over here. There's a little bit of raiding over here. The only other option, I think, is, seeing as the Confederates start here, is they could move this way and maybe threaten Baltimore, but then their route off is going to be threatened. It doesn't really matter in the sense that the game could end and they're stuck in Baltimore, their escape route's cut off, as long as there's some sort of supply, that they retain some kind of line of communication. They might be able to gain enough victory points to sort of smashing and bashing up here, to, as long as they're not bashed hard enough by the Unions, to still obtain a victory, and maybe a more substantial victory. But I severely doubt it, because the Union really is going to be able to kind of corner and catch them more quickly. That essentially the Confederates are going to move up and then move back as the Union comes. And it was here at Antietam that they were kind of cornered, and so felt they had to make a stand. But even then, they were able to move back through Sharpsburg to Shepherdstown and get back off. So I think the gameplay is going to happen very much historically, which will be satisfying for many, because you're kind of playing out the situation as it, more or less as it happened historically, with your own kind of responses to original responses to the original movements, so that albeit on the same lines as your opponent. So that this video has probably gone on long enough. I shall stop it here. I hope it's given some sense of this game system in its broad scope and the situation of this campaign as it is presented through that system. Over and out.